Hi, I'm Jennifer. Welcome to Orton Gillingham Coaching. Today we want to talk about the sounds of ED. Most people know that ED is a suffix, a beginning suffix, but some people may not realize that ED makes three sounds. It makes the ed as in painted, it makes d as in loved, and t as in kissed. So we have the ed, d, and t sounds that ED makes. Teaching ED, I start with drill cards, of course, but I have the ED card in two different decks this time. I have it in our consonant reading deck, and I also have it in the suffix deck. And that is because it's a little complicated, ED having three sounds. So first we just teach it as a phonogram. Up here on our scope and sequence, this is the scope and sequence from my scope and sequence workbooks. Yours may be a little bit different. I teach on this phonogram card that ED has three sounds. I teach that it is the past tense of an action verb, and I might illustrate, I jump, and once I've done that, I've jumped, and that is the indication of ED. You could go into affixes and then suffix, prefix in the next lesson, but right now it's important to hear the sounds of ED, translate that into seeing ED and realizing it has three sounds. So that's what we first want to get across. Then we can worry more about the fact that it's a suffix. It'll be in our suffix deck. And just to give you an example, it goes ED, EN, ER. These are our first through third, EST. So see, it's full. It's part of a whole deck, and we're teaching that at that point, really getting into suffix. But here on our scope and sequence, we're going to teach ED three different sounds. Our first activity is just simply to use our drill card and get the three keywords, the sounds, the keywords, and a remember sentence in. So we want to use rented, jumped, and sailed as our keywords. And we have a remember sentence. He rented a boat, jumped in, and sailed away. But the important thing is to get your phonogram card out, get the visual on the phonogram card, get the keywords, and get the remember sentences going. Activity number one. First activities you could do is to sort by hearing the sounds of ED. So this is my sounds of ED packet. I've created an activity. Of course, you could just take out some index cards, write these, and write the sounds. But if for especially a younger student, you would want to go through, read the words, even an older student to begin with, read the words out loud, have them sort by what you're reading on here. So, and then you could gradually have them move to reading them themselves and sorting them, but this is a very auditory exercise. So you want them to, let's see, you say lasted, they put it under the ED. You say build, they put it under the D. So it's all about hearing the ending sound more than it is reading the cards. ED is fairly early in your scope and sequence. It's up here. So your students, while they've done floss and some digraphs and blends and things, this is not going to be super easy for them. And this is really at first about the auditory part, really making sure that they hear the sounds of ED. So more than reading it at first. So have this exercise. There's quite a few words. You could, like I said, make your own, get a list and do this with index cards, but this, you could also do a packet. Another fun thing to do is maybe print two copies, cut them out, and have them do a matching game with these, where they have to turn them over, read it, and then gather as many pairs as they can. Another great activity for the sounds of ED, getting students to hear, have them read out loud. Start very easy, putting in columns. Now we're writing the words. I think this is about the time you could also have them recognizing very clearly ED is separate from the root word, and have the underline the root word, see the ED, read them together, put them in the column. Start easily, get a little harder, and then we even get suffix rules involved in the advanced state where, you know, we have the Y drop, E drop, and 111 doubling. So this is also from my Sounds of ED packet. Just, you could do this anywhere though. You can get a list of words and have them columns. In the very simple state, you might want to start by reading with them, talking about what do you see there. It's time to ask questions. What do you see? What you see, a root word? What root word? Let's underline the root word. What is the root word? What does the ed say? Then you put it under the columns. Then you can move to having them do the worksheets, but auditory first, hearing it, seeing it, labeling it, writing it, then just give them a worksheet. Say, okay, now we're getting busy. This is kind of the same thing as this, but it just got more difficult without any suffix rules. So, and then you could start getting, you get the suffixes going, then you have suffix rules. You still want to probably reiterate suffix ed has 3 sounds. So you don't stop just because you moved from the sounds of ed into, okay, now we just forget that. That's might be something you keep having to come back to. Syllabication is another factor in ed. The sound ed will make a 1-syllable word 2 syllables. The sounds d and t will keep the 1-syllable word 1 syllable. As you can see, painted now is 2 syllables, whereas shipped is going to stay 1 syllable. Loved stays 1 syllable. It's important to get a student to realize that as well for syllabication purposes. If you want to be dividing things into syllables or clapping or doing anything during this time, especially once you get to other suffixes. So this worksheet is an activity that you can do that shows syllabication. Okay, we're going to do this in dividing words. Later, for suffixes and prefixes, really, you circle prefixes and suffixes, pull the word apart, and then you can read the word easier. So this is a great activity to just start having them circle the ed. Obviously, most of these are going to be 1 syllable, but it still gets the student to recognize that ed makes 2 syllables, the other 2 stay 1 syllable. You could do it on a worksheet like this, or you could just do some dictation. Dictate how many syllables, what sound. You could even just write a list of words, photocopy it, and then have them do the same thing. This just is a formal worksheet for it. Speaking of dictation, you'll want to dictate some words. There's a couple of types of dictation you could do. You could first just dictate words, have them write them on a piece of paper. We could go simple, then get harder, and then you can eventually mix them with the suffix rules. And this is just a sheet of words, all of this is. So the second thing you could do is, if you are still trying to get the auditory of the sounds of ed, have them write the word and write the sound of ed. It's a great time to start asking some questions, especially to see if they didn't get it. If they didn't get it, it's like, well, what did you hear? What did you see? What did you spell? In our next activity, we want to get students start reading words with ed in some phrases and sentences. So starting with just some phrases, for example, tossed in a hole. We want to get them to recognize the ed word. I have on this worksheet, I have them underlining the word, the root word, and circling the suffix. Again, having them read it out loud or having you go through it with them, recognizing where they're making any auditory mistakes on it and discussing it. Then we move on to sentences, and again, sounds of ed, recognizing the ed words, pulling them apart, circling, underlining the root word and the ed, and having the sound written out. This activity is about getting a student to recognize when a word is the past tense of a word, another word, a root word, or when it's just a word that ends in d and t. So we have to start by, in this exercise, we're going to have ed. This is not a sound anymore. This is the suffix ed. And then we have d and t. Is it a d sound, t sound, or is it the past tense of a root word? So we would want to read the words on the cards, cut them out, read them, go through them. Last, and your students say, that goes in a t. Okay, filled. Ooh, that sounds like F-I-L-D, filled. Well, no. Think about this one. Look at it. Look at the word. Filled. That's the past tense of fill. It's getting a little more complicated now because you will get students who you say popped and they write P-O-P-T. We just learned blends not that long ago. I want to write P-O-P-T. That's A, easier, and I don't have to think about it being a past tense of the word pop. It's now popped. But that's why it's important to go through this exercise. We have to get students to recognize there are words that end in t and d, and there are the past tense of verbs that end in ed. So the ed sound no longer is really important in this exercise, but so we just have some go through it, and it's just important to have them hear the difference and know. You're never going to have them know every single word, and so it's all a learning process, but at least they're thinking about that. So first I did these cards with, and you can put these on index cards, but first I just did this kind of exercise where we go through some words and we talk about it and we hear it and we talk, you know, it's on a card and it's a little bit easier. Then this is an auditory exercise where you read the word, they hear the word, they write on the paper d, t, or the suffix ed or ed. And it's very auditory in nature. Then you go back, you discuss what did they hear. The main point in introducing ed as a phonogram before you introduce it as a formal suffix is to make sure that students know there are 3 sounds that ed makes. This concept is very auditory in nature, and a lot of your exercises should be very auditory. You want a student to hear the sounds and then move to knowing that it is the past tense of a word, of a verb. And then you want to move to students knowing that there are words that just end in d and t, and there are sounds of ed, d and t. It's a layered approach, and once you get past the ed making 3 sounds, the other words end in d and t, and it's the past tense, then you can lump it in with all the other beginning suffixes, ing, ness, and the rest, and it's just one layer building upon the next. So they kind of already understand ed is the past tense. Now I see it as a suffix. Now it goes with these other suffixes. It's in a lump of affixes that also have prefixes, and one thing layers upon another. And so ed is the beginning of that teaching, and it's a layered effect, as everything in the Orton Gillingham approach is. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you will like and subscribe and visit ogforall.com for more information, more articles, and check out the description for links from today's video.